Five, four, three, two, one.
Good morning.
It's Good Friday.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, yesterday's video, we didn't use a scripture.
Yeah.
We were just kind of describing what it would be like to be at the Last Supper,
At the table with Jesus.
Like, what would that have felt like? And I know a lot of you did think about it all day yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's good, It's good because it's those times when you think is that when the Lord starts to impress things in your heart, where things start to make sense, and like I was saying, remember to put yourself in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you do that, it changes your perspective.
Yeah.
Like that show, we watched this show, 60 Days In,
Yeah.
of these people that go into jail undercover. And in season 1, there was a young lady that her husband was a soldier, and she was like a stay-at-home mom.
Mm-hmm.
A little skinny little girl, but small,
Mm-hmm.
And at first she's like, I want to go because it's not right that these inmates get better food than my husband who fought in Iraq. And like she was talking very negative. And I mean, in the end, her whole perspective changed because she put herself into the narrative.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need to put ourselves in the narrative, and it's easy to judge other people because you don't walk in their shoes. And that's why it's like I always try to look at all the perspectives of something, and I would never will if I've never been in that person's walk or nothing, but I think it's important to reflect like that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think that's why it's important not to judge others, because we're not in their place.
Yeah.
And we haven't been where they've been. And sometimes we don't want to go where they're going either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got to be careful. We got to be careful with that.
Yeah. Which kind of leads me to what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Peter denying Jesus 3 times.
Yeah.
And I think it's another one of those opportunities to try to look at this from a different perspective. I think a lot of us are really harsh with Peter for denying Jesus 3 times.
Yeah, like, oh my God, how could he? That was so wrong. And, we're very judgmental and critical about that.
Yeah, but he loved the Lord.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, he still denied him 3 times, and when you really look about it or think about it, which is what I'm going to read today. Well, let's read it first and then talk about it. In John chapter 18, let me see, this is there. John chapter 18, verse 15. I'm going to start from there. It says, and Simon Peter followed Jesus. So Jesus was arrested already. And Simon Peter followed after the entourage that was taking Jesus. And so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Many believe that John is talking about himself, that he knew who the high priest was. So he was able to go into the courtyard where they took Jesus, and he talked to the girl at the door, and she let Peter in. So that said, verse 17. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, Are you not also one of this man's disciples? Are you? And he said, I am not. Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Is 15 through 18 separate there?
It's 15 through 18 altogether.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, read that.
Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. That the other disciple was known to the chief priests, and so he went in with Jesus to the chief priest's courtyard. Peter had to stay outside. Then the other disciple went out, spoke to the doorkeeper, and got Peter in. The young woman who was the doorkeeper said to Peter, Aren't you the one of the man's disciples? He said, No, I'm not. The servants and police had made a fire because of the cold and were huddled there warming themselves. Peter stood with them, trying to get warm.
So it's obviously cold. It's nighttime, really late actually at night when they arrest Jesus and take him. So while they took Jesus in to interrogate him, these people are standing outside, these servants and the officers, and they're kind of standing around a fire to warm themselves.
Yeah.
And here's Peter. Like, Peter was literally with the one that is arrested. He don't know what's going to go on. I wonder if he's thought, like, are they going to arrest us too?
Yeah.
You know, he probably, we know that Peter had a wife. He had children. We know that he had a family. I mean, you know, I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just talking about the reality that he was probably afraid for his future.
Yeah.
And for his life. And this woman asked him, and he's like, yeah, I'm not his disciple. So that was number one, the first denial. But I want you to remember some, because we're going to talk about it later. The fact that it was nighttime, it was early morning, and they were warming themselves over a fire. Okay, that's going to be significant. So let's keep going.
You're going to read it all, or are you going to jump over to 25?
No. Okay. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. We're going to jump to 25, verse 25. It says, Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, You are not also one of his disciples, are you? And he denied it and said, I am not. It's number 2. And one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, Did I not see you in the garden with him? And Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed.
And meanwhile, Simon Peter was back at the fire, still trying to get warm. The others there said to him, Aren't you the one of the disciples? He denied it, Not me. One of the chief priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, Didn't I see you in the garden with him? Again, Peter denied it. Just then a rooster crowed.
You know, I want us to go real quick to Luke. Same account, but and Luke says something a little extra that John doesn't say. Luke 22, verse, let's see, 61 and 62. So after Peter denied Jesus a third time, look what happens in 61 and 62.
Mine starts with 60.
Okay, that's fine. I'll start with 60. It said, But Peter said, Man, I do not know what you are saying. And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. So after that third rooster crowed, look what happened. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, Before the rooster crows, you would deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly.
Peter said, Man, I don't know what you're talking about. At the very moment the last word hardly off his lips, a rooster crowed. Just then the master turned and looked at Peter. Peter remembered what the master had said to him. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. He went out and cried and cried and cried.
I mean, Jesus is being interrogated.
Yeah.
Yet, when Jesus heard that rooster crow, in that whole crowd of people, beaten up, tired, treated bad, the Bible says that his beard was ripped off of his face. And in the middle of that, he turns around and looks right at Peter. Man, how do you think Peter felt? Knowing that he just denied knowing Jesus, like that's heavy, man.
Yeah.
The fact that Peter, how it says that Peter, where's it at? I lost it. I went back to John, but it said he wept.
22.
He wept bitterly. He went out and cried and cried and cried. So whatever the situation was, whatever happened, whatever caused Peter to do that, it broke him.
Yeah. There was regret.
Yeah, and
Conviction.
maybe I'm talking to somebody that maybe you yourself have denied him or have denied him before, and you can't forgive yourself. Maybe you served God at one time. Maybe you served God at one point. But the time came where you denied him. And it's almost like as if the moment you did, like as if he turned around and he looked right at you. Peter wasn't there when Jesus was crucified. He abandoned Jesus.
I think a lot of the times people stay away because of shame.
He was ashamed.
Yeah. And I think it's hard for people to come back because of the shame. Sometimes they don't know how to. They feel unworthy,
If that was me, if I would have denied Jesus 3 times, I would have wanted to just die. Like Jesus turning around and looking like right at my face, knowing what I just did. I would have wanted to go to the deepest cave that ever exists and just hide. And it's crazy to think that Jesus suffered, whipped, crucified, and Peter was nowhere around. Peter was the one that says, I'll go to jail for you, I'll die for you.
Yeah.
But in those last moments as Jesus was on the cross, he couldn't even look out to the crowd to see Peter.
But he was also the one that kept telling him, I will never deny you. I won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I will not deny you. After he told him more than once, yes, you will. He said, no, I won't.
It paints a perfect picture of God's forgiveness.
His grace and mercy.
It paints a perfect picture of no matter how strong we think we are, we can't ever be that sure like him. I think Jesus was trying to show him something.
Yeah.
Because see, when Jesus says, I will never leave you nor forsake you, he'll mean it.
Yeah.
And Peter said it, and he didn't do it. So Peter goes off, wasn't there when Jesus was crucified. And even then, like after the resurrection, Peter was like, he was hesitant. Like when they ran to the tomb, like Peter was hesitant. He got there second because John got there first. John ran over there. Well, after the women told him, John runs over there and Peter goes over there. And so Peter saw the empty tomb, and honestly, I think that double shamed him, because it's like, man, it's bad enough that I wasn't there, that he died.
Yeah.
And I denied him. But now he's denying that. Now he is like, didn't even believe that he resurrected. Wherever Peter went, whatever happened, it was a double shame. Because not only was he not there when he died and denied him, but then when the women told him he was resurrected, he didn't believe it. So anyways, it jumps to, I'm saying all of this stuff to get to this point, guys. Is that after the resurrection, after Jesus had already appeared, I imagine like Peter was still embarrassed. Peter was still in shame. And Peter went back to his boat.
Yeah.
Many times, like when we feel like we're embarrassed of God, see, that's the thing is the enemy will come and make us feel like, oh, you can't face God anymore. What kind of Christian are you? What this or that? So we go back to the thing that we came out of. See, Peter used to be a fisherman, and Jesus says, now you'll be a fisher of men. But here Peter is back on his boat, back in his old life, back in his old stuff, back, and I think I'm talking to somebody out here that you went back.
It's almost like the drunkard that goes back to the bar and he goes back and he's all drunk and talking about Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was Peter.
Yeah.
So this is what happens. This I'm saying this whole story to get to this point, guys. To get to this point. So Peter's on his boat again, which he should have never been. And all of a sudden, it says here that they were out on the boat all night long. So he not only did he backslide in a sense, I really don't like that word, but he had some of the guys with him, the other disciples, back in the bar.
Yeah.
Basically. And they went to get fish and they weren't catching nothing all night. And all of a sudden in the morning, again, remember when Jesus was denied, when Peter denied Jesus, it was morning, it was cold, and there was a fire. And here Jesus appears in the morning, it was cold, and Jesus builds a fire. It's like Jesus wanted to recreate that night when Peter denied him.
Yeah.
So
I never caught that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So once they realize that it's Jesus that's over there, because he's like, hey, you got any fish? Once they realize, Peter jumps into the water and swims. He goes, it's Jesus. It's him. And he runs over there. And this is the part that I want to get to, guys. So there's Jesus making breakfast. So when they had eaten breakfast, they already ate, they sat with Jesus and everything. And Jesus said to Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you, he said to him. And Jesus says, well, feed my lambs then. And so he straight up asked him, do you love me more than everybody else? And there's Peter again, And then he says it again. He said it to him a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my sheep then. And he said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. See, here's the thing, right? I'm going to go real deep, real quick. A lot of times it's beautiful how Jesus will recreate a scenario on the part that you were most ashamed of to instead bring it and redirect it. Peter denied Jesus 3 times on a cold morning, dark morning over a fire. So Jesus recreates a fire in the dark morning, and Peter denied him 3 times, and Jesus asked him a question 3 times. And at first glance, you're like, man, that's cool. He redeemed himself because Peter was able to deny 3 times, but yet he was able to say, I love you 3 times. But it goes deeper than that. See, the original Bible wasn't in English. It was written in Greek. And the word love, where he says, do you love me? Do you love me? In the English language, we only have one way to say love. Like, I can love my wife, or I love Cadillac coffees. Obviously, it's a different kind of love, but we're very limited in our English language. But in the Greek, there's different types of love. And there's two words of love that were said here. There's agape love, which is the perfect, unconditional love of God. And then there's phileo, which is a brotherly love. That's why, like, the city Philadelphia is named after. It's named after a Greek word. So check this out. If you look at it in the original Greek, Jesus asked Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me with a perfect love? See, Peter was humbled. Because remember, Peter was like, oh man, I'll go to jail for you. I'll cut somebody's ear for you. I'll carry a sword. I'll die for you, remember?
Yeah, yeah.
But knowing that Peter denied, and Jesus is saying, do you agape me? Do you love me with everything? Do you realize Peter says, I phileo you. He couldn't brag anymore because he was humbled. So he's like, Jesus, like, do you agape me with a perfect love? And Peter's like, yeah, I phileo you. So Jesus asks again, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter again says, yeah, Lord, I phileo you. Because Peter knew he couldn't do that because he denied him. And there's a beautiful part. If you look at it in original Greek, is a third time. Jesus says, Peter, do you phileo me? Jesus came down to the level because he knew Peter couldn't go up to him. So Jesus came down to him.
That's so beautiful.
And Peter starts crying. He says, yes, Lord, I phileo you. Peter understood that he could never love the Lord in the same way the Lord loved him.
Wow.
And it's so beautiful because Jesus knew that Peter denied him.
I've always loved the way you explain that. It's just...
And Jesus knew that Peter could never agape him.
Wow.
So Jesus came down to Peter's level. That is the gospel story. Do you realize that a holy God that we couldn't reach came down as a man to come to our level? Because he knew we couldn't love something we couldn't see. So he came in our level to be something we can see. So we can love him in that sense. That's why he's the bridge.
Yeah.
You know, and it's Good Friday. But it wasn't such a Good Friday that day. But Sunday's coming.
Yes.
Sunday is coming.
He walked that Via Dolorosa, carrying that cross, that heavy, heavy cross.
Yeah, for us.
Yes.
So I just want to leave you with that, guys. Yesterday, I wanted you to reflect of yourself being in the room.
Yeah.
Today, at 3:00 is when he said, it is finished.
Yes.
And the earth turned dark and the earth shook because the Creator, the Savior, died for you and me.
Amen.
So at 3:00 today, set your clock. And we're going to set our clock. And at 3:00, just imagine him in complete agony saying, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing.
Forgive them for they not know what they do. Yes.
And he says, it is finished. And it's more than his life. Everything Satan had done against you, everything that the world has against you, everything that was going to happen, has happened, will happen, Jesus died for that. When he said it is finished to break the chains that have held us back from him.
Amen.
It is finished.